sorry, this is the syllabus. I didn't have a problem here. So you start with one cell. You're going to make it into a tissue, like a body tissue, not a tissue. And then you're going to take it and you're going to have it folded because the brain is a tube to start with. So, sorry, I'm on the best quality paper. Okay, and you're going to take this tube and then you're going to expand it and fold it so that part of it will become your brain, part of it will become the spinal cord. The spinal cord will get really small, but it's the size of your thumb, but that's where all stuff goes to your arms and legs. So if you ever have a chance to see a spinal cord, it's really tiny, but really important. Any damage to it will leave you, in a wheelchair and stuff like that. So, and it's really hard to repair. So this is kind of a 101 version of, or intermediate version of embryology, but that's the basic of it. And then as we go along the talk today, you're going to get to add more genes to it and more concepts to it, but that's the gestalt of it, I would say. So for those who don't know me, I'm a pediatric neurologist, which means I'm a neurologist by training, but I specialize with working with children. So most of my patients are, well, actually my patients are all less than 18 years old. And I have I see patients with learning disability, epilepsy, autism. I also see people with migraine, and other diseases that affect the brain. But those are the ones that are specialized in learning disability. And I'm going to give you a talk on February 2nd, I think, talking about that. And this is 1 day a week what I do, and except some weeks of the year. And then the rest of the week I am a basic science researcher using fruit flies. So in the talk I'll give next week or the week after, next week, I'm going to show you why we use fruit fly, why it's a good model for what we're studying. But so I basically share my time between the two things, which is great because it allows me to talk with two types of people, the doctors in the hospital and also the basic science researcher. So basically, the overview of what we're going to do today is how to get from one cell to a brain. And one cell is the product of the sperm and the ovum, which each have genome. And we're going to make 100 billion neurons, and only 7 times or more than that time astrocytes with that. So that's a huge multiplication we're going to do here. Sorry, I added that last night. So why is it important to do embryology? We always people study embryology because that was part of the study. It's just the same as anatomy was a major part of medicine. And so that was the traditional way of seeing that. But now we realize that all patients I see in my clinic are somehow talking to me about embryology. People ask me at what time did this happen to my child, a scar in the brain, things like that. So it becomes really important to know how does the brain develop. The other thing I discovered is that many of the genes we are finding in humans that are important for epilepsy, mental retardation, all those things, are actually genes that will impact on development. So this is kind of a two street. You learn about the gene, you learn about disease, and then you study about genes. So the effect in brain development will affect multiple things. I just listed a few here. Epilepsy is one of them. Learning disability or mental retardation. We use now the term intellectual disability, autism, and brain cancer. You're going to have one of the, actually, Bertha or even me, an expert on autism coming to you next week on Tuesday. Lonnie Zagerbaum is a great speaker. And he sees, I would say, most of the kids with autism in Edmonton. And he has a big team called the Autism Clinic. So defects in brain development lead to important neurological disorders. So in addition to being important by themselves, because it's interesting to know how the brain develops, it's also very important for clinicians to know how this is happening, because then you can pinpoint what time of the pregnancy this happened. And is this something that's going to happen again when you have another baby or not? So the overview for today I wanted to do first is review the tool we use in the clinic. Then go over the steps of the brain development. This is pretty dry, and we would say it's like mineralization. So I'm going to intercalate into that the disease that we will see at each step, so that you can get a feel of the flow. A bit like he was talking about not knowing the dates of each guy in the history of neuroscience, but more knowing the progress type of thing. This is the same idea. Oh, and before you ask, everything that is in the exam is on the slide, so there's no reading material, you don't need to read the textbook on anything like that. So let's start with the tools used to study brain development. So there will be a bit of overlap with what Kia talked on Thursday last week, but repetition is good for your memory. So how can we learn about the brain development? So one way people used to do that is, and we still do that, is with pathology. So as you know, your brain is inside your skull, and you may have seen on CSI New York that they open it up and they look at the brain when you're dead. So that's the same thing people still do. And so that's why it's important for children with malformation or disease sometimes that the parents will authorize autopsy to be conducted, is because they want to advance the science about this. So grateful to that, we've learned a lot of stuff. We know that the brain, and that's how the people derive these diagrams. So at each step of development, and these are reached post-conception, the brain changes. It grows in size if you compare. And you'll see that hopefully the architecture is present early on, but that this is a smooth brain. And you may remember Pierre's talk about showing, I think at some point, a mouse or a rat brain, showing it was smooth. So in lower mammals, in other mammals, I should say, the brain won't have as much bumps and crevices. So people, based on anatomy of children that were lots of different stages of pregnancy, had actually already constructed that a long time ago, those stages of development. And they were able to then say, this is a 4-month-old fetus, or this is, so on and so forth. So you'll see that the brain looks pretty adult-like when you look at it roughly at birth. I'll show you later in the talk this is not the case. The second method we use more nowadays is MRI. So Kia talked about it, so I won't go into the details of it, just to say that's one of the tools we use a lot in the clinic. So we basically perform studies that give us a very precise picture of the brain. To me, when I was a medical student, this was just starting, the MRI. We were doing CT scanner, but not MRI so frequently. So I still remember the day we got the first MRI machine. It was the brain opening and things like that. So we were so amazed that it looked very much like the stuff we were learning in the anatomy lab. It was amazing to us because a CAT scan does not look like that if you've seen CAT scans. So it was very precise, and we could also have computer reformat the brain in different directions. So you could have an axial view. Here I've shown you the different kinds of view of the brain. So you could do the exact same thing with the MRI, which you cannot easily do in the CT scan. You could look at a sagittal view from the side, and that allows you to see different structures. And then in your brain, you reconstruct a 3D version of that, and then you can see if this is, the right size, the right place. So this is something that started, and we're doing now here in Alberta is the in utero. So just to orient you, this is the mom here, somewhere. And this is the baby inside the mom. So with this, you can diagnose actually stuff in utero. So they use that a lot actually for cardiac here in this hospital because it's a huge cardiac center, so they can see the defects. But they can also look at brain malformation and see if there's a major malformation, then you plan the pregnancy or the delivery or the care after delivery accordingly. So, and basically what you see, I didn't want to hold all the images, but you see the same thing as you can see on this picture, is that you can date the brain evolution also with that. And based on the conception time, we know the brain should look like this or not, so we can detect if there's a defect of the brain doesn't develop as it should, doesn't make those bumps. And it's more like that, for instance, that's going to be a certain disease. So that helps us a lot actually in the clinic. The other thing we do more and more and more and more and more, and by the time you're in practice or in your job, you're probably going to do a lot of that, is we can analyze patient DNA. So anybody remembers these guys? Seen that somewhere? Yeah. So Watson, James Watson, and Francis Crick, then at Cambridge in England, basically described this double helix, which we have graphed here. And basically using those models and data from other researchers as well as themselves, were able to construct this double helix, which was major sort of things conceptually at that time. Now, this is not conceptual anymore. Every doctor, even family physician in the private office, will order DNA tests all the time. So this has become something that we did in the lab maybe 20 years ago. Now it's like common practice. It's like ordering CDC or something like that. DNA is compacted into chromosomes though. So if you look at the chromosomes, you may have seen a picture of that. It's a tightly compacted double helix. Okay, so when I look at this, I'll show you later. This is a very compacted version, and I'll show you why this is important to remember that. But when you see chromosomes, just so you get an idea, this is a compacted double helix. This is a karyotype, so that's the test that people will get most of the time as a first-line test for genetic disorders. The karyotype in humans has all this chromosome, and if there's XY, it's a boy, and XX is a girl. And basically, these are staining that we use, and we basically look at those bands of black and gray. And if people are missing a band, then we know there's a deletion there. If we have too many of a band, then we know there's a duplication. But the problem is, as you can imagine, you're looking at this thing. You're not looking at that level. Okay, so you're looking at the band on this with a microscope. So this is like a super compacted version of that. So you will not see if there's a change in this space here. You will never see that on a karyotype. Okay, so that's why for a long time we didn't know much about the genes that govern development because we're looking at this tool and we're not looking at this level. So it's like I can tell you, there's a house missing on the street, but I won't be able to tell you if there are bricks missing in the house in the street. So just with an analogy of size basically. So that's why not we, but that's why a company started making those affirmative chips. Those chips, so those gene chips are basically arrays of, I don't have that here, I'm sorry. You'll have that in action next week, more details about what's the chip. But a chip is basically a tool that allows us to look at very fine details inside the genome to see if there's deletion or duplication. One of the ways we do that is with comparative genomic hybridization. Comparative genomic means that we compare genomes. And hybridization is because, you remember the DNA is a double helix, so there's one side and the other side will match it. So on the chip, we print one side, and then we put your DNA and we see if there's a matching side. If there's not a matching side, and sorry about that, there won't be a question about how this works in the exam, and I'll add more slides about that next week. But basically the idea is that we're going to see if we have enough of the patient sample compared to a reference sample. If we have a 1-to-1, we get a yellow. If we have too many of this, then we get a red. So that tells us there's a duplication in the patient. If there's too little red, then the green will win, and that's what you see here, and that means there's a deletion. So that's all it does. It allows us to look for smaller deletion and duplication than the karyotype. The future, and this we do in Edmonton every day. There's quite a wait list to get it done, but we get it done at some point. And that's new for like the last 2 years. So these things they were in Science and Nature paper as research tool in 2006, 5. So that's like 5-6 years now. We have it as a common test your doctor can have it. So, these things are moving really, really fast. The next step we're moving to is now taking the double helix and knowing every single base pair. That's sequencing the genome. So they did James Watson back in 2005, 6, 7, something like that, for more than $1 million. And now the cost I'm trying to get for some of my patients, it's $8,000. So you went from $1 million to $8,000 in less than 10 years. So it's moving really, really fast. Okay, and that's the test we're going to have, I would say the next 4 or 5 years, probably here as a custom test. So the point of those tools is that we want to make the connection between this double helix, which contains the genes. So that's where the genes are encoded, is by sequences on DNA, and the brain malformation we'll see in our patient. So that's kind of the tool. We have some imaging tool, genetic tool. We'll come back to, we'll have a little summary at the end. So next, we'll review the steps in the brain development, and I'll just go with the disease that we see commonly, or the disease I've seen myself at some point in those patients. And if you have any questions, I know this is really thick stuff to, when it's the first time you listen to that. So if there's something that you don't understand, that's okay, because it means there's at least 5 other people that don't understand it. So just raise your hand and just ask me about it. So a few anatomical landmarks. Peter did a good job at just going over the anatomy, but I'll just give you the main things that are important for this session. You remember there's a cortex? And cortex, we'll call it sometimes as telencephalon. Then we'll use the brainstem here, or sometimes call it as rhombencephalon. So the in embryology, people will use terms that more relate to the developmental stages, and so that's why you may see these things. And there's the cerebellum also. So this is a timeline of the major steps in brain development. So you don't have to remember the dates of that. That's more important for me when I see a kid in the clinic and there's a part missing and I need to know which step of the pregnancy this was to know if this has anything to do with a car accident the mom had at that time, or was it completely not related. Because these things can get really important at some point, as you can imagine. And also it can tell us about which gene are active at that time, so we can know which gene to test for in the mom or in the father. So, but the main developmental event is, first one is the gastrulation. So I showed you we start with one cell, we make a tissue. At some point we make a 2-layer tissue, and at some point we make a 3-layer tissue. So that's what this is. Then neurulation is making the tube. Post-encephalic development, I skipped one thing which I can still not do with my paper sheet, is we have to make 2 hemispheres. Remember, the brain has 2 hemispheres. So we need to split this tube, at least in the front, into 2 parts. Proliferation is we need to grow from one way, from small amount of cells to a huge amount of cells. Then the neurons need to migrate to the right place. So there's a full gamut of disease that have just to do with the fact that the brain cells did not migrate as they should. So the brain cells are not all in one place to start with. They need to move from one spot to the other. And then there's the organization. And that's a huge amount of research that's going into that now, because that's where the problem is for many kids with autism and developmental disability. And then I guess the final stage, about those stages actually overlap, I would say a lot, is the myelination. So you'll remember the neurons are myelinated, their axons are myelinated to increase the speed of conduction. So you're not born all myelinated as you are right now. And actually you're not right now as you were when you're 30 years old or 40 years old. So we'll talk about that. So the first step is gastrulation. That's kind of the boring step, but that's the step that is the most important. If you don't have that, you don't make any brain tissue. Basically, you'll have 3 layers of cells. As I said, you already have the endoderm and the mesoderm, but you'll have to make a 3rd layer. You have already the endoderm and the ectoderm, but you have to make a 3rd layer, which is the mesoderm. And it's meso because it's in the middle. So basically, this is the egg, and it makes an amount of cells. And then the cavity here with liquid. And you'll have this layer here, and this layer here. And if you follow that, it'll become this epiblast and hypoblast. And I don't have a good schematic this here for that, but basically what happened is there's a branch of cells that will squeeze in between those two, and will make the 3 layers. Now, you'll say, what's the big deal with that? Well, if you don't have those 3 layers, it just stops the development. So you're lacking signals to induce the proliferation of the brain cells, for instance, and the skin cells. So that's the gastrulation, formation of 3 layers. That's all you need to remember about that. And I'll just go quickly through that because we don't have so many diseases we can talk about this. Now, primary neurulation is a big step. And that happens at 3 weeks after conception. So it's within the 1st month. So it's very early. And this is my sheep example. So basically you get a flat tissue and you're going to need to make it into a tube. And so neurulation refers to the formation of the neural tube from the flat layer of ectodermal cells. So this tube is shown here. So you have a structure that will be the Neuroscience structure here, the notochord. And the notochord will basically induce the proliferation of those cells, but also will induce a shaping as a tube of the cells that are above it. And so that's what will become your neural tube. There's a lot of genetic known about that. So that's why I wanted to point this out here. There's basically, think of it as ventral signal and dorsal signal. Don't read all these things. All I want you to remember is that there's some important genes in this. The TGF, transforming growth factor beta, the whole morphogen so BMP, and sonic hedgehog. And so BMP and TGF beta are dorsal signal. So you see it in this figure here. The TGF beta family has multiple things within it, and they affect the dorsal side of the spinal cord, or the neural tube, I should say. Part of it will become the spinal cord, but part of it will become your brain. And so those factors will diffuse and make a gradient. And depending on which amount of each chemical the cells will see, they'll become a neuron, or they'll become a sensory cell, or more cells, or something like that. And then the ventral signal will be given by sonic pitch-out, which we'll talk about afterwards. So I think for you just to know that there's some signal coming from the dorsal aspect, the ventral aspect, and those are the names of them. How they work exactly, I think, is more, it's very interesting, but it's a bit beyond what we can cover. Some genes are expressed, like I said, in dorsal and other in ventral. So this is nice because it gives a lot of insight about how the genes are important and how they work. Because initially people thought that maybe that one cell was born to do this and the other cell would be born to do that. What we realize now is that it's really the cells are kind of very important, so they're exposed to a gradient of chemicals and then for protein, and then based on that level of maximum conjugation, they will become what we become. So you basically could do that with an animal model where you change the gradient and change completely the nervous system. Okay, so it's not like fixed as you start. This is the more advanced at this stage of that. So you see this tube. I'll play it again. So this tube is closing. It's initially open, but it's closing. Starting in the middle, it will close in the front here around 24, 26 days. And it will close at the end, in the bottom part, so in the posterior pore, at 26 to 28 days. So you close this one first, and then this one goes later. It's multi-segmental. It's not just like one zipper like you thought initially. It's actually multiple zippers going at the same time. There's a lot of disease actually associated with that. Sorry for the pictures if you find them difficult, but these are the type of disease actually we will see with that. This is a child that's born actually, or may not be alive when he's born. But we have some patients where we actually saw them, they were born, and they actually died soon after. But that illustrates the fact that there's a lack of closure of the anterior nerve form. So the part where the head would be, the skin has not closed, the tube has not closed initially, which prevents the skin from closing actually. And so this is a defect of the anterior nerve pore closure, which results in what we call anencephaly. So the brain, as with an encephalon, will not develop. And so this child could be born alive and breathing because he still has the brainstem and he still has the spinal cord. So the breathing center, as you may remember, are in the brainstem. So you could be breathing and your heart could beat fine, but you would not have any brain, basically cortex. So that would be, not a good thing. Thus, having no closure here will lead to a lot of infection. So people will be born with catch meningitis and we will die soon after. So this is a very severe type of malformation, which I guess we do not see very often. I'm sure many of the pregnancies are lost actually before baby can come to term because of this severe type of malformation. The other one we may have heard about, but there was some association at some point, I think still now, is the spina bifida. So you may wonder what's spina bifida, and I've heard that sometime. So spina bifida refers to the posterior pore closure, so the low back closure. And that's why the kids will be born with. There's a defect in the closure, so there's an extravasation of the membrane. The meninges can be there, you can have even the spinal cord going down there. There's different stages of that. And what happens is the kid will be born with basically an open lesion in the low back. There's some children though that will be born and the skin has covered this, so we call it occulta because it's like occult, it's hard to see. So that's cases where we will see the kid as a little hit in the skin, and we'll do MRI, and then we'll find these kind of malformations. So we see that every, I would say, couple of years in my service, but mostly neurosurgeons will deal with that. And nowadays, people can find that in utero, plan for the pregnancy to be delivered in a very sterile environment, because the major problem is you get infection through that, and so that can lead to get having meningitis and then die from that. Most problems will relate to the legs, because as you remember, the spinal cord at that level controls the legs, and as well as the ball and the bladder. So there's experimental therapy of actually, after finding this in utero, going back, putting a patch of skin. And people have realized the patch of skin has the stuff to induce the formation and the culture of the ball tube. So that's why I'm talking about those GMT and TGF and all that, because it's actually going into medical practice to try to use those cues as implants, I guess you could say, to kind of close the tube backward. We cannot go and change the genes, but we can go and put the drop-it factor. So, the rupture of the posterior neural cord lead to spina bifida with very similar defect in the leg of the child. So we'll leave the tube there. There's way more disease than that, but I just want to give you a flavor of all the type of disease, so we won't have, we won't be able to spend too much time on that. Also, syphilic development occurs in the second month of life. So the stuff we've seen so far occurred in the first month of life. So now we're going to move to the second and third month. So like I said, we have a tube now, and we've closed it. Now we want to make the hemispheres. We have two hemispheres. So we're going to need to grow asymmetric or symmetric bulges, I guess, something like that. So the anterior part of the neural tube will split into post-encephalic vesicles. Vesicles because there's, remember, this is still an empty tube. There's in the middle space. So it's not like a solid cylinder. It has a cavity inside. So that's what's represented here. So you go from having one forebrain to having two, by having phenencephalon, which is two vesicles basically, which you can see here. And that's what people will use as the forebrain with the diencephalon, which is your pentagon. So this is a picture of a child that I did not see myself, but that would be very representative of that kind of condition. This girl is 7 years old. She's right-handed, and she walked around 16 months, which is a bit late. The average is more around 12 months, although there are some children that can walk at 16 months and be completely normal. She talked around 2 years at her first words, which is also a bit delayed because we would expect that to walk at around 1 year. She had been diagnosed with ADHD. Her IQ, and we'll come back to IQ in the next lecture, what it is, what it means, how do we use it. But the IQ was slightly decreased at 80, the average would be 100. And she had mild hypotonia, microcephaly, which means a smaller head. So this is a tough question. And there's no extra points, sorry. No reward. But this is a picture of her. So would anybody venture a guess of what do they find is different, or what do they think is maybe suspicious, or how about the picture of the child? Yeah, we've got one brave volunteer. I think it's the first volunteer for 210 this year.
Yeah, we should have a prize or something.
Okay.
Is it something with the eyes? Or
Okay.
You know?
What do you find is different with the
I don't know, they just maybe, they don't seem like they're both looking in the same spot.
Okay.
I don't know.
So are you wondering if she has strabism? Like the eyes are crossed?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, that could be. What else? Oh, no. What's wrong there? The ridge you find is here, is not there. Okay. Anything else? Those are not symmetrical. Okay, yeah. So everybody's kind of looking at this saying there's something wrong there, something suspicious there. And you're right. And the eyes also are abnormal. So this patient has what we call a cleft lip. So you might have heard that some doctors go to other countries to help kids with cleft lip palate repair. They basically have the left ear open. It's like split open. And so it's very socially, visible, I guess. And so there's some doctors in some countries that will, there's doctors from here actually that go in other countries where they do not perform those surgeries routinely to help the doctors that do that. And the reason why this is kind of irregular in the ridge is not super, pronounced, I guess, is because there was a repair that was done for this child. So what I didn't tell you in the past medical history is that she had a cleft lip repair, which means that the split upper lip has been joined together. And I guess we would not tell the surgeon that he did a bad job. But we would say that he did his best with the situation, but that's why it is. And I think it's why you see a bit of an abnormality with the tip of the nose also, and there's a bit of an angle right in the nose. Now, with regard to the eyes, they may be also strabism, but the other point to notice is that the space between the two eyes is kind of small. It goes very closely to the nose, which you can see in normal people. But the point of our investigation, like Kira was saying, and what Sharp has pioneered, is to try to put together science that would fit a certain story. So, if you see somebody doing something one time, you don't know about that person so much, but if he does it a lot of times, then you know there's probably something there. It's the same for the brain and the neurological exam. So when I'm a student starting, I think that this patient has this, and that, and I'm many times wrong. But now, I can know, do I make a story that fits together? Because if I have something in the brain that does something, I will see sign this, and that in this physical examination or our physical examination. So I'm trying to combine sign. So here what I'm combining is the story with the mid, and then the eyes, and you're right, the mid-facial part is kind of abnormal too. So this girl has basically what we would call the midline facial problem. Okay. And you'll remember that this is just a picture of the brain from the side, but if we were to slice it like that, this would be horizontal. What's the other technical term we use? Transverse, axial actually is the term we use. So think about axial tomography for CT scan, that's the way you slice it. So on the axial cut, that's all the terms you said are right, but that's the term you'll hear if you go to a rotation or something with radiologists or neurologists or neurosurgeons. So on the axial cut, what you can see here is that there's a split between the two hemispheres. Okay? And we're in the section of the prosencephalon dividing, if you remember. So that's what this looks like when you're done with that. Two hemispheres and two hemispheres. There's some joining in the middle. This is your that hemisphere. But the bottom line is that you get the split in the front and in the back piece. And if you go up from the convexity, you'll see it's split all the way up. So if you looked at an MRI from that patient that I showed you initially, what you may see is that there's actually no small split. So there's kind of a blurring of the two hemispheres going together. And that's what we call holoprosencephaly. So remember a couple slides back, we talked about the prosencephalon. Holo means that we got one prosencephalon instead of having two parts. And that's a type of severe disorder. The girl I showed you is very mildly affected. She's lived normal life and she didn't have like epilepsy and things like that. But patient with this kind of MRI would not, this is not the MRI of that patient that I showed. This is a patient that would be very severely affected right now. And you can see the ventricles do not form normally either. And the back of the head does not split also normally. This, I think, is part of the stubborn, but again, does not look normal. So disease of the splitting of the brain are known as holoprosencephaly. So it's a failure of cleavage of the two hemispheres. And that's a very severe disorder. It is a gradient. So like anything, when we started in medicine looking at kids, we thought of always the most severe case. Now with MRI, we can see cases where there's just a tiny bit of communication between the two sides. Sometimes that's enough for the kid to have epilepsy and developmental problems. But all I'm saying is that we are finding out that there's very severe, but there's also very mild cases with that. So the absence of cleavage of the two hemispheres is known as holoprosencephaly. That's a very, very important disorder. Not so much because it's very frequent, but more because we know a lot about the genes that govern it. So I guess I'm told this is Sonic. I don't play games, so I'm a fly guy, and it's the fly guys who named it that too, because the fly guys always are kind of special, and they do all sorts of games. But I guess another real fly guy then. But several genes are associated with holoprosencephaly. One of them is sonic hedgehog. And sonic hedgehog, like any other gene, does not work alone. It works in a pathway. So like yourself, you're not alone in the world. You have, a network of people that are family, friends, things like that. So it's the same. Think of the genes. They don't evolve as one thing. They're kind of in a network. I don't want you to remember all the sonic hedgehog pathway. That's not important for you. But what is important is to know that you got this factor, again, is a factor that will then affect the receptor. Okay? And then will lead to a cascade of things that will change DNA and change DNA expression, actually. So we don't know, I think, exactly why patients with sonic hedgehog mutation get holoprosencephaly. I'll show you later that there's other people with other mutation of sonic hedgehog that get different types of disease. So it's probably because there's modification in other genes in the network that will tilt it in a certain way or tilt it in another type of disease. But the important thing is that this is a very well-known pathway for that type of disease. There's actually researchers here at the U of A, Andrew Vesevich, that works on this gene and how this gene leads to photosensitivity using animal models. So he's investigating how we could at some point try to cure this disease, by interfering with that pathway. So if you want to know more about that, just let me know and I'll put you in contact with Andrew. The sonic hedgehog pathway involves the patch receptor and the sweetener receptor. And that secondary messenger liability that results in transcription of DNA and proliferation, among other things, because we are finding other roles for those genes like almost every month or year, at least in science and nature. So you're going to read about these genes. If you open Neuroscience, you'll see something about these genes pretty much in every issue. Something that's occur on the second week of gestation and this in the formation of the brainstem. So some patients are born with facial nerve palsy. Does anybody know what the facial nerve palsy is?
Essentially Bell's palsy?
Yeah, Bell's palsy is one of the type of facial nerve palsy. In Bell's case, we think it's a virus in the reactivation of that virus that will lead to an inflammation of the nerve, swells up, then gives you a facial palsy. Usually it's unilateral, it's not bilateral. Some cases it's bilateral. But Bell palsy is one type. So facial nerve has three parts and covers all that here. And what you can see in this patient is you would say you don't have much expression in their face, like here. In this case, you see he's trying to smile, and there's a bit of a smile here, but not much here. It's not because the patient is depressed or sad or anything like that. It's because the nerve that does convey the electricity from the brain or brainstem to that muscle or those muscles is just not working properly. There's multiple reasons why you would have that. Like you said, in Bell's palsy, that's one type. That's the most common one. This is more rare, but that's the one we'll see in our clinic in times where the child is just born and the parents are like, doesn't smile, doesn't respond. And actually, I've seen a couple of patients with this kind of condition. What we know about that condition, those congenital, so those patients that are born like that, so we call that congenital, it's been named Mobius syndrome. So that's the downside of being a physician, is that you have to memorize a lot of syndromes. So if you're good at memorizing stuff, you're very good. But if you're not good, you have to learn a lot of names of dead people that were famous at some point. But so Mobius syndrome is a syndrome that describes the congenital, so you're born with it. That's what it means. Partial or complete facial dysplasia. Dysplasia means bilateral paralysis. Okay, so other kind of nerves may be involved. That's what tricked me actually with my patient, is that she came because her eyes were crossed. And nobody had noticed really the facial weakness because he was not as severe as these guys. So we were like working off why is the eyes crossed and so on and so forth, because that's what you'll get with sixth and third nerve palsy. And then we looked at her in pictures and we're like, Lily's not smiling much. And mommy's like, no, she never smiles. So we realized that she actually had a bilateral facial weakness. That was, I would say, moderate. Plus those, and then we know, oh, it's Mobius syndrome. There's also associated with this malformation of the limbs. Chinovarus means the pointed feet. So these patients will, initially we were thinking these patients just have a facial weakness. So if you read who is a medical student, you ask Mobius syndrome, they'll say facial weakness. But what we realize is that there's also limb involvement. And that makes sense, once you know the embryology or the reason for that. The reason for that is that it's a disease in the brainstem. And the cause is those genes called OX1 and OX4. So what is that? So I'll bring you back to history. Actually, a couple of years ago, there was those fly guys working on fly genes that make the fly embryos. Okay, so they were not medical related at all. I've actually met this one and this one. Never met with this one. I don't know if he's still alive. But yes.
He's not alive about this.
You've met this one?
Yeah, he's gone now.
He's gone? Oh, okay. I'll think you Brad. Is it a Caltech that you got? Yeah. So basically, yeah, very nice, super bright people. Actually, this one came to give a lecture here at U of A last year or 2 years ago. And he still does experiment, so he's not this kind of researcher that stays in his office. He's actually doing experiments and stuff. So anyway, super bright people, got the Nobel Prize. Because of the research on these fly genes showed that these fly genes were not just important for fly patterning, but also for disease that we were finding in human. And the Hodge gene are part of the gene they discovered So these scientists found the gene involved in Drosophila and group patterning, but also realized at some point that those genes were important in making us here in this room. More importantly, making our brain. So that's what's shown here. Especially, I would say this diagram doesn't extend so far in the brain, you'll see. It's more like the spinal cord and the brain stems. I think we don't know as much about this part, but we're finding that the Hodge genes, which stands for omnibox gene, are also important for telencephalon. It's just that's an area that's still being investigated, so we don't find it so much in developmental textbook yet. But just for your information, what's important is that they basically lined up all the genes that were important to make the longitudinal axis of the fly. And then they looked at the staining of those, they looked for those genes in the mouse model or other mammals, and found they were lining up exactly in the same sequence in the, and they were involved in making the spinal cord, like I said, and brainstem. I think stay tuned and you'll see the telencephalon in a couple of, well, there's already evidence for that, but you'll see it coming in the next couple of years. So basically that means that the patterns, or the genes involved in making the fly, which is very far from us in terms of evolution, are still very important and conserved in this situation. And what my patient with facial dysplasia is an OX mutation. We don't know which one. We did not test for that. That's not currently available here, so we did not get the testing, except the OX1 or OX4. There may be other OX genes that we don't know about because I think we don't test all the patients. But the problem is in the brainstem, and that's where the nucleus for this nerve, those nerves actually, the facial nerve and the third nerve and the sixth nerve are. So what's happening is that there's lack of the gene, lack of this induction signal I was talking about for those cells, and then absence of that nerve developing normal. And so those patients just don't have the nerve, or if the nerve is there, it would be very abnormal. There's some graphs of other nerves that the surgeon will do, the plastic surgeon will be involved to do some graft, trying to re-innervate those muscles, because the muscles are there, with other nerves. Or if it's one side, they'll try to cross the nerve, so you can innervate both sides. So there's some treatment, limited options, but there's some options for these parts. So it's important to make the diagnosis. So what you can realize from this is that the genes involved in development are similar between species. And if you're a person studying the genes of development, it is obvious to you, I think, just by reading on doing the research, is that there's a huge amount of conservation of genes between different species, basically. What changes is how what's going to happen exactly. So we do not look like the turtle, but as you'll see here, at the beginning, we are pretty much similar. Okay, so from a human to, I like the turtle because it doesn't go back in. At the beginning, I would say I'd be obsessed to ask you which one is which. Is it your turtle or is it your sister? It's very hard to tell. So, and I think nowadays people realize that it's because the genes initially are very, very similar, okay, and their expressions very similar. Then we'll reuse those genes as we make learning and memory, we make autism, things like that, and we'll splice them in a different way, or I'll do different things with them, which will cause different proteins, different products. But the basic set, is very similar. So this was a huge, huge parenthesis for prosencephalon development. But that's a really important one. Another super important one is neuronal proliferation. So like I said, and I have explained to parents many times, and you'll have to explain that to people, in your family sometimes, is that you start with a very small amount of cells that you have to make a huge amount with, to interact with your brain that you got right there. And you're still making cells, as we talk right now. And if you went to the gym this morning and exercise, or I don't know if you have like one of those things like the rat has or the mouse, that you can roll for the circus, you could add that to it, I don't know. It's been shown that you will have neuronal proliferation in your hippocampus, in your olfactory bulb, other regions like that. And it is ongoing. This is a new, not so new concept anymore, but that's a very important concept that people 50 years ago, I think, would have thought would do very much. So neuronal proliferation occurs after the prosencephalon development. And you basically laid out this telencephalon now. You're going to have to amass a huge amount of cells to make the hemispheres thick as they are in us. So that's what I'm representing here by this thin layer of cells going into a thicker layer of cells. And it's more than just the encephalon that will do that. All the tube will do that. I just got tired and that's But the brain is thicker than the tube, and that's why we need cell proliferation. And also you want to add, lots of cells to do a lot of conjugation. So in some patients, there's an excessive normal proliferation. So again, this is a quiz. This is called hemimegalencephaly. So mega means big, hemi means half. So what do you think is the normal side? This side or this side? And I'm going to take a up in the air and fold. So who says this one is abnormal? Okay. Who says this one? Okay. So I think you're all right, but you have the red page next to it. But that's all good. And your yield is probably better than our yield in the clinic. I chose an easy example, a more easy example. Sometimes it's not as straightforward. But sometimes we'll think actually that because we always think of disease as something that destroys the brain, okay, as clinicians. So if I showed you a CAT scan or an MRI like this, in my clinic I could think, oh, maybe this kid has had a stroke on this side when he was very young, and that's what we'll see, the hemisphere will shrink. Okay. But the thing I always do in my clinic, and I don't carry it with me right now, is a tape measurement. Like when you go to the tailor and stuff, they have a tape measurement. We do the same thing with kids. Every kid that goes, and you may remember that when you were children, going to a pediatrician, we will measure the S-conference all the time. The reason we do that is that if I'm right and this is, or if I'm wrong, and this is a slope, the brain will be smaller than it should be. Okay? When I measure the head, it will be smaller. If you guys are right, and this is the hemimegalencephaly, which is a rare disorder that most pediatricians will see maybe once or twice in their lifetime, the head will be big. Okay? So that's how we input clinical things like measuring with the tape measurement we got at Walmart, for $1 or $2. With this super fancy MRI, which is about $750, $1,000 for a child. We'll put those two things together, super low cost and super high cost things, together and make a diagnosis. So you're right. In this case, this is the abnormal hemisphere. It's big, and also you can see there's this white signal in the middle. Okay, this white signal is not normal for this age. And we would say also that this one's clearly defined. You can see, by the way, I don't know if you remember that, but these are the gray cells. Because in pathology, when you do pathology, you'll see it goes gray. And there's the white cell, the white matter, which has no cells in it. It's the cable, it's the axons going from the cells running down to the spinal, going from one side to the other. So anyway, this one is very clearly defined, whereas this one's kind of blurry. See, it's not as sharp. So when it's not as sharp, it's not normal usually. And so that's what you're seeing here. So again, I'm putting multiple things together. It's big, it's thick, it's not clearly defined, and there's this big white matter abnormal signal there. So it tells us that there may be a problem on that side. So you never want to go with just one thing, because then you may miscall stuff. So you want to multiple signs going together. And you can see it here again. It's larger than this side. The white matter is very, very wide, and it's kind of blurry in some part of it. I guess you could say this is very loose because we're averaging two cuts here. But that's the idea. So the bigger hemisphere presents an excess in cell proliferation. So I would say it's kind of beautiful to think that all that goes well in most people, because just a tiny bit of changing in one gene, you can end up with a problem like that, which is causing, in some kids, lots of seizure, mental retardation, issues like that. So a very abnormal kid, I would say. So to control and balance the proliferation, the one thing here is that its individual sides are different. So that's one concept which is kind of important. It's not all the brain is the same. So even hemispheres are different in terms of control. But also that you have a wide variety in size control that you can get. So proliferation disorder, there's an excess in cells, but in the case I showed you, we would say, for instance, that the cells are tiny, but are relatively normal. So they look normal in size. In the shape. It is a disease called tuberous sclerosis. You may have read that in the news. And you'll probably hear a lot more about that disorders in next couple of years. Tuberculosis is, you may remember what the tuber is. You know, it's the stuff that is in the ground that, I don't know what kind of tubers is there. Potato and yeah, stuff like that. So it's like a mass basically that is in there. And so the reason they call this disease like that is because in the patient, you'll see on the picture I'll show you, there's this malformation that look like if there were like, I guess, something growing inside the cortex. Okay, so that's why they call it this way. And it's paired with the name, but it's Dubu-Mobile, which is a French name, so just as I have too much French in my brain, so I cut it down. But there's another name you would have to remember. Disease, not for the exam, but for medicine. Disease of the skin and the brain. That's a very important type of class of disease. So those are diseases where the doctors back in the 1800s could actually diagnose a patient with 100% ill just by looking at the skin of the patient. And that's why we always look at the skin of the babies or the patient that comes to our clinic is because they can have a skin patch. In this case, white spots that will tell us that there's a likelihood or possibility that could be that disease. And if you have more than a certain number, which is more than 6, then we'll be concerned about that. It's not always the case you have a disease, so if you have one spot of white, don't panic. But if you have too many, that's what could happen. And it's associated with mutation in the gene called neuroscience. And there's 1 and 2, TSC1 and TSC2. Now, those mutations are associated with intellectual disability, epilepsy, and it's one of the very frequent causes for autism. So if you have to find a reason for a kid to have autism, this is one of the big causes we'll find. Many times with autism, we do not know the gene of the state. Johnny will talk about that next week, but this is one of the ones we know. So this is a patient actually I saw here, which has this kind of lesion. So now we're looking at the cortex, at the brain. We're cutting it this way, so coronal cuts, and we're seeing the cortex, but we see some white spots here in the cortex. It's like a bulge, I guess you could say. We also have those nodules here that you can see, and there's another abnormal signal. So those are the tubers. They are not tumors. Okay, so they are slow-growing masses, but they're not aggressive. They won't metastasize, that kind of stuff. But they will cause problems. You can imagine if you got a mass in the middle of your brain that will lead to problems with the neuronal network. Problem with neuronal network will lead to autism, seizure, mental retardation, dysfunction of that part of the brain, if it's in speech area, for instance, things like that. So those lesions are known as tumors. They are slow-growing tumors, but they are not aggressive or, tumors just mean mass in our language. It's not necessarily it's aggressive or metastatic or stuff like that. And a patient will have multiple lesions. They may not appear as such initially. So I'm saying there's a couple of patients where initially it looks like they just got 1 or 2 lesions, and with time those lesions grow, and there's maybe a little nidus somewhere else that is growing and then becomes apparent on MRI. So that's one of the plug for the neuropathologists in the audience, or people wanting to be neuropathologists, is that there's still a huge amount of space for people to do pathology, try to figure out, stuff that we cannot see with MRI, because there's still a lot of stuff we don't see on MRI. These patients with neuroscience will also have a tumor or lesion in a region that is the region of foramen mono, which is really important for training the CSF. And those are called subependymal giant cell astrocytoma, better known as SEGA. Now, the reason we talk about that is that it's not all the patients will have that. But the patient that have that, if it's left untreated, sometimes can lead to death. Actually, that was one of my first patients when I was a pediatric resident in Montreal. Patient arrived, put on the scanner, there, patient dead. We didn't even have the time to call the neurosurgeon. The problem with that lesion is it just stops the flow of the CSF very suddenly, and then the CSF creates huge pressure in the brain, and then the brainstem goes down, and then it stops your heart and your breathing. So that's a big, big problem. Now, for a long time, there was not much hope for these guys because if you have to go and remove this, you have to go all throughout the brain. For a surgeon, that's difficult to do without causing damage to the cortex and the subcortical white matter. So people have been looking into the basic science of that for a huge amount of time. But in the last 20 years, especially, or less than 15 years, I would say. So I was actually in Boston at a course one day when there was some basic scientists presenting on those genes because we had mouse model, fly model, and they were saying like we should use a drug that blocks that pathway. And again, the pathway is very important. So they developed this drug, tried it in a mouse, and find out that it helped shrink the tumor. So this is like Boston back in 2000. Well, it's less than 10 years ago. It's in 2004 or 5 or something like that. Last year, there was an article published in New England Journal. Neuroscience is the company that makes this drug. They found a drug that would actually block that pathway, and they showed that the tumor will stop growing, at least for the time the patient's taking the drug. The question now is, what happens once the patient stops the drug? So that's the question that we don't know the answer to. But there's a lot of studies. I have a lot of patients asking me actually how we get this drug because they want to. Like I said, this is lethal. It's not good. It grows very slowly, so that's the good thing about it. But the bad thing is that it does not stop growing. So it's hard for the patient. So anyway, you don't need to know the name of the drugs, but just to show you that in less than 10 years we got from animal model people working with clinicians, then clinician back, and then trying to do those things on the patient. So, and in some disease so this was the excess of proliferation, or the proliferation of abnormal cells. So we can have a situation which is the reverse. So in anything in mobility, I guess you'd always have too much of too little, and that's usually not good to have too much of too little. So the too little is the lack of proliferation. So actually, our lab discovered here a new cause of proliferation defect in one patient. This is a plug for my lab because there's actually a bunch of other genes that have been discovered as well in other labs. We actually know a lot about what will make the brain too small. There's a guy actually at Harvard that does a lot of work on that, looking at the genes using those methods that I've talked about, the array-based or the chip-based method, to find these. And in this case, the patient was observed at microcephaly, so a smaller thing. So we always plot, I told you, we always measure, and then plot the head circumference of the patient. There's, in between these lines is where most patients will be. This patient was born normal, well, I guess in the lower side of normal, but still within the range, and then started kind of stopping growing. This dot, we don't know what it means. And then we think it's slowing down, maybe catching up a bit. We saw it again more recently, and it's kind of spitting a bit more from the normal line. So we're worried about that. But our patient basically presented with what we would say head circumference that was normal at birth, but then fails to progress normally. So we were really worried about that. Actually, the pediatrician that had to say that saw the patient was really worried about that, so sent us the patient. And what we did is we did that chip method that I talked about, and we found that this patient had a mutation in the gene called FOXG1. Now, FOXG1 stands for forehead box G1. So box, remember those omnial box. Forehead is because the fly that was described with it had this kind of malformation in its head. So it's again another fly gene that was also present in humans. It was found to be abnormal. I may be biasing my talk to a fly gene feeder, I'm sorry. But it's amazing still. I get a lot of people laughing at me for that. But anyway, the FOXG1, you remember the sonic adjunct gene we talked about at the beginning with autoposencephaly? We also talked about it for inducing the neural tube. Well, it's here again. It's an inhibitor of growth. So in other words, it's an activator of growth. That's one way the system is always, or many times patented, organized, I would say, is that you get an inhibitor of an inhibitor, so you get an activation. I don't know why it's working like that, but it's working like that many times. Anyway, FOXG1 is another stimulator of FGF, which is another growth factor that will lead to the proliferation of the telencephalon cells. So more neurons in the telencephalon. So it kind of makes sense if this patient has an abnormal gene mutation in this gene. Actually, she has a full deletion of that gene, so she does not have that gene. So what happened with her is that she has a lack of proliferation of brain cells, and then we see this head circumference measurement not being up to par. It implies also maybe that there's proliferation of cells after birth, because this is relatively normal at birth. And you would think maybe we'll have to follow her longer to see if she follows that curve, in which case you would be just starting with less cells to start with. You kind of phase shift down. and that's why the brain is smaller always. Or if it's progressive, then it means that cell proliferation is an ongoing thing that is important. So that's something that we don't know. So you start from a patient that you see in clinic with a problem, and you're diving into genes, and then you're going to try to, with that, know maybe if proliferation is more important than just up to birth. Maybe it's important afterwards. So you can learn a lot from your patient, actually. And we reported our case in a paper with my residents. And basically what happened with that is that Foxy, like I said, is a member of the 4-kid family initially describing flies. There's more groups now actually working on that, screening the patient with a smaller head, and there's a syndrome related to that too. So we went from 2009, having a paper about a gene in the patient, and now 2011, there's reviews about those genes, and hundreds of patients around the world now being screened and found positive for those genes. So the speed, I would say, with the connectivity of the world now is accelerating at a huge speed, the amount of discoveries we're making with that. A group can report something in Brazil or in Dominican Republic or in Moscow, and then the day after we're going to be soon starting to test those genes and look at them. So it's very, very quick now. So that's the proliferation side of things. And there's, like I said, way more genes than that. I just wanted to give you a flavor of too much to live, but there's a lot more genes than that. Neural migration is a very important step. Actually, this is a step that many of the people that have seizures have problem with. It is a later time stage, 3 to 5 months. The cortex, and that's an important concept. Cortex is formed, oh sorry, that's a bad typo. It is organized, but it's formed also of 6 layers of neurons. As you can see now, number here, 1 to 6. So it's not like anybody is different in this room. We all have like different thinking and stuff like that. But still, our cortex, if you were to look at it, would pretty much look all the same in terms of layers of organization. And so that's why I have some colleagues that worked on layer 2 of the mouse or the rat, and did a morphophysiology of layer 1, 2, or whatever, to always the same spot, so they can have the same connectivity, same network, the same type of behavior, the same type of cells. Now, this cortex. This is a human cortex, so each animal has different number of layers and things like that. This is also another very important part of forming the cortex is the migration. So the migration of the cells is not occurring just random or as it pleases that day. It's pretty systematic. The brain cells are born around ventricles. So in this would be close to the ventricles, the center of the tube. Okay. This is the outer part of the tube, which means like the more distal part of the tube. Now, in this case, what happens is you get these cells that will extend all the way up, like type of poles, I guess you could say, and then the neurons will migrate along that, and then they will stop at a certain time, in a certain place, into their layer. So they won't like stop, they should not anyway, stop any place they want. The migration also, and this is an important concept, is inside out. So they need to migrate outward. They are born in the ventricular zone, and then they all migrate outside. There's other types of migration for other type of cells. For instance, the inhibitory cells will migrate radially, tangentially. But for most neurons, that's the way they will migrate. Now, when I started, they said these were beta cells, and at some point, we realized that those may be progenitor cells that then later transform into glia. So I don't know if we have the final word on this, but the idea is that these guide cells basically will then transform into something else. And we'll come back to that in the organization phase because that will become important. So the neurons are born, just to repeat again, in the periventricular zone, migrate outward, find a niche or a layer, and then stop there. And then the next layer will go on top, and the next layer on top, and on top. Like this is known as the inside-out migration. So what does it look like that's in an MRI? So at this stage, which is like an adult brain, you will not have this migration anymore, but just to give you a flavor of what it looks like, basically you have this migration from inside out. There's some disease where it actually stops, and there's some genes known for that. One of the genes that is very common is the gene filamin 1. But there's also other genes that we're discovering all the time. One of them recently was connected to that is the Fragile syndrome, which I work on. So we actually tested if the two genes work together using fruit fly, and we found that the Fragile X gene and the filament A gene interacted genetically together. And this is just one example, but you would see a lot of those genes connected together in the literature. So other migration defect you could see is basically a type where you do not have this bump type of thing, with gyre and the suicide. So this is a normal axial MRI again. You can see there's bumps here. I can see that, the white spot, sorry, the white lines are the circumvolution, I can see. That would be a scan actually of a patient that's seen where there's no bumps here. You see it's all smooth. It's a bit in the front, but not in the back. So we're learning about the genes that do that. There's several of those. This one is one of them, 1433, double 14 is a big one, read-in and ARX. So I won't get into what these genes do exactly. If you're interested, you can talk about that, but just for sake of time. Now, that's it. Our last two bits are organization and myelination. So, as I said, the cortex is organized in 6 layers, but there's one layer that is late to form, or later to form, is the subpial zone. We don't know much, I would say. Well, the basic scientists know a lot about this, but in human, we don't know so much about it. But we know it changes a lot, and it is very important for the expansion of the size of the brain and the organization of it in the later state. I'll just say that. The neural outgrowth is another big part of that stage. What I mean by that is that the cell will migrate up and to the layer, and then they will then kind of turn on another set of program, which is to build connection with their neighbor. So you see that at the beginning, the cell bodies and the axon are present, and see more of that here. But then what happens later, 32 weeks in this example, is that you start connecting the cells together sideways. And I think of it a bit like the dual core processor. You got one there, one there. You don't build a stronger processor, you just put multiple processors and you have them parallel task. That's the same thing we think is going on with the cortical column, we call it. So those columns are like unit of processing maybe, but then they're connected together. So that's a purely speculative explanation. You don't have more information about that, but that's the way we tend to think about it. This connectivity between the cells is very important for epilepsy. Abnormal connectivity like that actually has been shown because some surgeons have devised things that will actually cut those connections at the cellular level. They have shown that this will stop the spread of epilepsy. So in my mind, if it can spread epilepsy, it can also spread ideas and things in the brain. But this is purely speculation. We don't know that level of functionality in the human cortex at this point, I think. The other big thing is the synaptic development. So we're talking about the finishing of the brain here. Like we've got the cells there, but now we need to network them together. So you've moved to Edmonton, you started at U of A, now you're making friends, you're making networks, you're connecting with other groups, you're going to expand to other departments, you're going to get ideas from art, biology, philosophy, mechanics, all these things you'll put together. So that's what you're doing at this stage. The brain cells are have two parts, I guess you could say, well, three parts, I guess, the cell body, remember the axon and the dendrites. So the dendrites is where the synapses are made, the connection between the cells. So remember Peter's talk on synaptic transmitter, and I heard there was quite a lot of emotion in that talk, technical emotion. So you probably have that engraved in your memory forever. But the idea is that these connections are not made just like in diagrams up in the air. They're actually physical things. So physical things are influenced by the size, and the shape of things. So basically what I mean by that is you can look at these. Some of them are long and thin. Some of them are more mushroom. Okay. So that's an evolution from stage to stage. This is the mature look of it. I'll come back and talk about that. Well, actually, I'm not going to talk so much about it, but in Fragile X syndrome, which is the syndrome I work on, people have discovered, a long time ago actually, that they have more of those types. They do not develop those mushroom type of things. And the interaction between filament and Fragile X that I talked about in the previous paper we published is showing that, or is suggesting that this is one of the part of the problem. Now there's another paper that was published this week I saw that actually talks about another structural protein, ulnar, that actually could explain also why this is not happening as a shape, why it isn't shaped as it should. So you start by illustrating or finding like what's going on, and then you have to plug in what's the gene working for that. The other thing that happens a lot also is the synapse pruning. So you're basically making a ton of synapse initially here, but then, oh, sorry, there's a part missing at the bottom. Can you see it in your slide? No. Well, anyway, it's not important to know the time, but there's at around 2 years a huge amount of pruning. So you basically have made a lot of synapse, and then you use them or you lose them. So if you didn't use them, the system is kind of plastic enough so that you're not going to do the exact same thing as your mom and dad did, or your predecessor or whatever. So the brain is going to be influenced by what's happening to you in your life, and that's what is this window. Depending on your experiences, you will change the brain connectivity. And that's going to happen again when you're a teenager. You may have seen this thing David was with you last week on teenage brain. There was something also in National Geographic a couple of months ago. So back in October, actually. These kind of pruning happens not only at that stage, they happen multiple stages in your life. The other big thing is misunderstood or not so well understood, at least for me, is the glial proliferation. So there's one, for each neuron, there's 1.5 glial cells, and that's a conservative estimate. So we didn't talk at all about the glial cells in this talk, and because I don't think we know much about it. There's a lot of research being done on that. We know that the poles that I talked about that help for migration, they transform into glia. We don't know much more than that, I would say. Disease of organization are different from the disease that I showed you with the brain malformation. In these diseases, we don't see much when they do an MRI scan. Parents are like, what's wrong with the kid? The MRI looks normal. Why is the kid not normal? And then we have to explain is the connection between the brain cells. That's harder to explain than showing, there's a problem here on the cat. But we know that many of the mental retardation are associated with that, including Down syndrome, Fragile X syndrome, Angelman syndrome, and many of the causes for autism. So Ronnie's going to talk about autism next week, and I'm going to talk about Down, Fragile X, Angelman next week as well. So, like I showed you, many of, and I'm going to wrap up this picture, many of the causes for, a lot of the brain development is occurring after birth, and we don't know much about what's going on there. Polydipsia, other stuff. The reason why the brain has to grow so big is because the woman, they cannot go bigger with evolution. And at some point, the baby has to come out of the mom, okay, and then probably without the doctor to do a C-section. So the brain had to, basically when you're born, you're kind of premature in a way that your brain is not as developed as it could be. So that's why it develops so much in the first 2 years of life. The amount of brain growth you get in the first 2 years is as much as you're going to get from 2 to 18 years old. So it's a huge amount of brain growth. And that's probably the reason for that. So, and that's a new concept I just wanted to introduce, and we'll talk more about that in the next lecture, is that the genes required for brain development are also required after brain development. And this is kind of a segue to what the last couple of slides will be, is that we found that the Fragile X protein is required in flies when they make memory, even after they're born. So we thought, this is important because it means that the protein is important all the time, or at least several times. And this was kind of a shocker because people say Fragile X, you're born with it, and kind of you're like that, that's it, that's all. But now more recently, people have found that the brain does not develop normally in size. In many parts of the brain, the caudate, the posterior, all sorts of brain parts in Fragile X patients grow too much after they're born. So this is not your abnormal before you're born. It's also after you're born, your brain does not develop as it should be. We're just starting to understand what's going on here. The final step, and I don't have as much to say on this one, is the myelination. It's a super important step, because that's how you can move your fingers and your hands and play the violin and stuff like that so well. It speeds up the conduction of brain activity. It also turns on stuff in the brain. In other words, the frontal lobe gets connected really late. It's not connected when you're 10 years old. It's not connected as much when you're a teenager. That's why you'll drive 150 kilometers an hour in the 60 kilometers zone. You're kind of more impulsive. You're more risk taker. Then you kick in at some age and you connect the frontal lobe, which gives you much more inhibition, social cognition, and all those things. So that's myelination, and it allows for speeding up activity. The white matter initially is black, and as you get older, it gets white. So in my patient, I can see if this is not developing normally. Actually, we found new genes for those type of disease in patients that do not develop that. And that's what's using the gene shift again, that we found that there's something on chromosome 14 that's really important for that. Again, this is just an example of us, but there's a lot of other groups looking into that in Montreal, in the States, in Scandinavia as well. So just to wrap up, there's a sequence. You don't need to know, I think, the exact time of these, but just to get an idea of how the process goes. And if you have more questions, you just email me here. That's my email, and you have it in the section. Next Tuesday is an exam, and I'm just reminding you to bring pencils. Students, it's all multiple choice questions. There's plenty of time.